going to do the exact same thing here. He's going to give an account. He's going to give a picture of what he just talked about pride. And this time he's actually going to show you someone who does it the right way instead of the wrong way. So verse 46, we're just going to walk through these verses. Then he came, and you know me, I'll stop like all along the way here. Then they came to Jericho. And Jericho, what do you remember about Jericho? What do you remember about Jericho? Come laying down, yeah. Joshua built the boat of Jericho, yeah. That's what you usually remember. Well, Jesus is back at Jericho. He's come through Perea, across the Jordan River, which would have been high at that time. He comes into Jericho. Jericho is 800 feet below sea level. Jerusalem is 2,500 feet above sea level. So you can see there's going to be quite a climb up into Jerusalem. But he's coming into Jericho. And as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples, so he had been there a while, he had been there for a time to travel through this region. And if I can just do a side note here, because he's headed to Jerusalem to go to the cross. And it's interesting, and we're in the last week. I mean, next Sunday, it's not Palm Sunday, but we will be talking about him entering into Jerusalem, which we usually think of as Palm Sunday. And during this last week, he has 4 conversions that happen. 4 conversions. 4 people get converted during this last week. And it's interesting who they are. The first one that Mark does not record here is Zacchaeus. And what was Zacchaeus? He was a wee little man, yeah. But what else was he? He was a tax collector. He was the despised tax collector, and he got converted. Then we'll see this blind beggar today get converted. Then we'll see a man who's hanging with him on one side, one cross, while he's on another. A thief gets converted. And then we'll see at the very end a Roman centurion, one who was of the, quote, enemy of the Jews, say, surely this is the Son of God, get converted. It's really interesting. The 4 last conversions are a despised tax collector, a blind beggar that we're going to learn more about this morning, a thief, a known thief, criminal, and then the enemy. Just a side note there. So he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd. And the crowd is huge. We know Zacchaeus, what did he have to do? He climbed up a what? Sycamore tree. He had to climb up a sycamore tree because even be able to just see Jesus. There were so many people around Jesus at this point. Not far from here is a town called Bethany. And in Bethany, that's where he raised Lazarus from the dead. They would have known about that. So there is this large group of people following Jesus, around Jesus, as he's making his way to Jerusalem. And then it says, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road. And if you didn't know this before, the word Bartimaeus, bar means son of. So he's the son of Timaeus. So Ben, your name would be Bar Adam, son of Adam kind of thing. And he's a blind beggar. He can't do anything else. He's resorted to being alongside of the road. And I'm sure that Bartimaeus is thinking, this is a good day. Because you want to be alongside of the road where there's a lot of foot traffic. And there's a lot of foot traffic today. And so he is really thankful of where he's been placed. But this is his life. Sitting alongside the road, begging. I want to... sometimes you have to see some things to understand it. We were at Founders Week a couple weeks ago, and I was able to go with Jason for a couple days. And it was Thursday. It was Thursday night late. We stayed for the evening service at the Moody Church. We were trying to get back to the train station. We were trying to catch a certain train, because if we didn't catch that train, then we had to wait a whole another hour before the next train went, and that meant a whole another hour before we got home. So I was pretty motivated, to get all the way across town to catch that train. And usually I'm trying to keep up with Jason. It used to be the other way around. Now it's the other way around. I'm trying to keep up with him, and so he would be right alongside of me, kind of, and then he wasn't there. And then he was there, and then he wasn't there, and then he was there, and then he wasn't there. And I'm like, what's going on? I mean, I'm so focused because we got to get to the train station. We got to get this train, And I'm just hoofing along as fast as I can go, And I turned around one time to see, where'd he go? And this poor college kid was stopping for the guys that if you've been to Chicago, you've seen them. They're on every corner in little tiny areas where they can keep warm. He was stopping for every guy. It was Thursday night, so he wasn't going to be going back to school till Tuesday. And he was emptying his pockets of all the change he had. And he was getting down in front of them and putting money in their thing. And I know. Well, what they might use it for, da-da-da-da-da. But I've never been able to be compassionate if I'm critical. You can write that down. You're never compassionate if you're critical. And I think far too many times we get critical of situations when we need to be compassionate. There were blind beggar Bartimaeus as he was walking by. And I saw this again yesterday. Maybe God wants me to see this, but I saw my own wife take someone else in her arms and so it said to her, you just need a hug. You just need a hug and you need to be able to cry. And she just engulfed that person. And that person just broke down and wept. It's awful hard to be compassionate if you're critical. Just remember that. So verse 47. He says, when he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene. So the crowd is saying Jesus the Nazarene is walking by. That's why there's all these people going by. They call him Jesus the Nazarene. They call him by his physical name, Jesus, and they call him from his physical town of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. That's what they call him. Watch what Bartimaeus calls him. He began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David. The word for cry out there is scream. It's the loudest Greek word that you can possibly get to proclaim something. And so he is not just saying, Son of David. No, he is just right at the top of his lungs. And look at what he's saying. He's saying Jesus. He mentions his physical name, but he says Son of David. He uses the term that they only use for the Messiah. So he's saying Jesus the Messiah. He's saying Jesus the Holy One of God. He's saying Jesus the Anointed One who has now come. That's what he's saying. The crowd is saying Jesus of Nazareth. He's saying Jesus, Son of David. And then he gives this request, have mercy on me. Now I want to take you back to James and John. What was James and John's request? We just want the right and left-hand seat. That's all we're asking for. We just want the best seats in the kingdom. What does Bartimaeus ask for? Just to have mercy. If any mercy, please give me mercy. Verse 48. Many were sternly telling him to be quiet. How does the crowd respond? The crowd says, shut up. He doesn't want to talk to you. You're making a disturbance here. You need to quiet down. He doesn't have time for you. You just sit there and beg. Be thankful. There's a whole bunch of people going by. Maybe you'll get a couple more coins, today. But he doesn't want to talk to you. And another thing. Anytime you take a step toward God, others will step in your path. They will. Anytime that you take a step toward God, it doesn't mean not just only salvation, but any step toward God in which you're going to do something that you haven't done before, but you know that God is leading you in that direction to do it, be prepared because somebody else is going to step in your path. Somebody's going to be oppose it. And sometimes, it's Christians who do that. Christians who are sometimes lukewarm. And they sometimes step in your path because they know they should be doing it too. But just be prepared for that. So Bartimaeus has the crowd stepping in his path, but he kept crying out all the more. So remember, the Greek word for cry out is like all out yell. So now he's all out yelling even more. And look what he says here. He says, Son of David. Notice what he did? He took off the Jesus. He didn't say Jesus' physical name anymore. All he said was Messiah. All he did was yell out the divinity of God who was walking in front of them. He says, have mercy on me. If I can take you back to James and John. James and John, they wanted the right and the left-hand seat. What they were asking of Jesus was for Jesus to elevate them. What's blind Bartimaeus doing? He's saying he's elevating him. He's elevating who Jesus is by calling him the Messiah. And verse 49, now this is the greatest part right here. And Jesus stopped. He stopped. I can kind of see, you see the whole crowd going along and Jesus goes, "Erk!" And then the rest of the crowd, hits into him kind of thing, But he stops. He stops for the person who everybody else is telling to shut up. He stops for the person who's despised, and most people believe that he must have done something wrong and therefore he's getting punished by God because he's blind. He stops for him and said, "Call him here." And so they called to the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, stand up. He is calling you." See how quick the crowd turned? The crowd was telling him, "Shut up." And then when Jesus says, "Oh, call him here," they're going, "Oh, hey, he's come alongside of him and said, 'Let me take you up to Jesus.' Yeah, I sit with him every week. Yeah, he's my best buddy." Well, I'm probably exaggerating there, but how fast the world turns and how fast it will drop you like a hat. Don't associate with them. Verse 50. Throwing aside his cloak. Cloak would have been an outer garment that he would have had. It would have been a very important garment because he would have been setting along the road. It was a comfort for warmth and things like that. But when he had the opportunity to be face to face with Jesus, he wanted to make sure that there was nothing that was going to hinder him. So he strips off this outer garment so it would not hinder his motion to get to Jesus. When we come to Jesus, we have to strip off our cloak. The cloak of sin. We have to make sure that there's some things that we need to take off of our lives. And we need to lay them aside of the road so that we can get to Jesus. And it says he jumped up and he came to Jesus. Verse 51. And answering him, Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" There it is. Same question. James and John were probably going, "Hey, wait a minute. We've heard that before. We heard that before because that's what he said to us. What do you want me to do for you?" Wonder how he's going to answer blind Bartimaeus, because we didn't get the right and the left. Even though he told us we're going to suffer, it's only for God to decide that kind of thing, but we didn't get the answer we wanted. So the blind man said to him, "Rabboni," that's teacher. That's a very reverent way of saying teacher, formally saying teacher. He says, "Rabboni, I want to regain my sight." So if he wants to regain his sight, he had sight at one point in time, and now he wants to regain his sight. If I was going to write a play about this, it would be like you would want to, I want to be able to see you. Because he's calling him the Messiah. Spiritually, how is blind Bartimaeus' sight? Blind Bartimaeus' spiritual sight is perfect. He spiritually sees Jesus for who he really is, while the rest of the crowd is still calling him Jesus the Nazarene. He spiritually sees Jesus. He's got perfect sight at this point. Verse 52, and Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." And that's a loaded statement. You kind of wonder, how all that works out, but I thought through this week. Did Bartimaeus, did he need to have physical sight to know who Jesus was? And the answer is no, he didn't. He didn't have to have physical sight to know who Jesus was. He could hear about what Jesus was doing and everything along those lines, and he came to the conclusion that Jesus is the Messiah, the prophesied one, without physical sight. Okay, then the second one was he complete in Christ without his physical sight? Was he complete in Christ without his physical sight? So if he died without receiving his physical sight, would he have went to heaven? Would he have known? Well, yes, he was claiming that Jesus is Lord. So he didn't need his physical sight, per se, in that situation. So your faith has made you well. I would love to be able to read that and say, man, he's talking about that the faith that has been given to him to see Jesus for who he is has made him completely whole to stand before the Father. And then on top of that, immediately he regained his sight and began to follow him on the road. Jesus gave him his sight back. He already had his spiritual sight. And then Jesus gave him his physical sight back. Blind Bartimaeus is like us if we're followers of Jesus Christ. At this point, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you are physically blind of him right now. But spiritually, you are not. Spiritually, you see him for who he is. And your hope meaning you're holding on to, not I just hope I get there. Your hope is of a heaven where you will physically see him someday face to face. You are like blind Bartimaeus in that. But Jesus gives us this analogy of the opposite of pride. He puts two things side by side, so James and John, who their response is, we can do it, to a blind Bartimaeus who just says, have mercy on me. He put two situations side by side so that you could see that, you know what it takes to be great and first in God's kingdom is to be slave and servant of all. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves this morning is, which one of these two are we? Are we James and John, and we're prideful ourselves? Or are we blind Bartimaeus alongside the road just begging for God's mercy? Which one are we?